What happens when a country rich in gold finally decides that its wealth should build roads, factories, and jobs at home instead of disappearing through foreign balance sheets? For decades, Burkina Faso has stood on some of the most valuable mineral ground in West Africa. Gold became the country's leading export and one of its most important sources of foreign currency. Yet for ordinary citizens, the visible benefits often remained painfully limited. Mines expanded, production increased, and foreign companies reported profits. But many communities still faced poor roads, weak public services, limited electricity, and a lack of stable employment. To understand the scale of the change, we must first understand the structure Traore inherited. Burkina Faso supplied the land, the labor, and the mineral itself, while foreign operators often possessed the capital, technology, refining connections, and access to global buyers. This imbalance shaped not only mining contracts, but also the country's wider dependence on external financing for its most important projects. This contradiction sits at the heart of the new economic direction promoted by Ibrahim Traore. Burkina Faso was never poor because it lacked resources. It was poor because too little of the value created from those resources remained inside the country long enough to transform the economy. Under the old model, foreign mining companies controlled much of the industrial production. Gold was extracted, exported, and sold on international markets. The government collected taxes, royalties, and a share of revenue, but a large portion of the profit left the country. That system produced gold, but it did not produce enough national strength. Now, the government is trying to change the direction of the money. Instead of accepting a system where Burkina Faso provides the resource while others capture most of the value, the new strategy seeks to increase state ownership, strengthen local companies, improve control over production, and create investment funds that can preserve mining profits for long-term national projects. This is not simply a story about taking over mines. It is a story about building a financial engine from the country's own natural wealth. The central question is no longer how much gold Burkina Faso can export. The real question is how much of that gold can be converted into roads, energy, factories, skilled jobs, and lasting economic power. That is why this story matters far beyond one country. It raises a question that has followed Africa for generations. How can a continent so rich in minerals continue to depend on loans, aid, and outside capital to build basic infrastructure? Ibrahim Traore's answer appears to be direct. A nation should first look beneath its own soil, then build a system that keeps more of the value at home. This approach carries risks and success is not guaranteed, but it represents a serious attempt to rewrite the rules of development in Burkina Faso. If you follow stories about African nations reclaiming control over their future, subscribe to the channel, because this shift in Burkina Faso may be only the beginning. For decades, the story of gold in Burkina Faso followed a familiar pattern seen across much of Africa. The country exported one of the world's most valuable resources, yet much of the wealth created from that resource never fully translated into national development. Captain Ibrahim Traore believes that changing this pattern begins with changing who controls the value chain. One of the first major steps taken by his administration was reforming the mining sector itself. Instead of relying almost entirely on foreign mining companies, the government introduced a series of legal and institutional changes designed to increase Burkina Faso's participation in its own gold industry. These reforms were not presented as an attempt to shut foreign investors out of the country. Rather, they were framed as an effort to ensure that partnerships would generate greater benefits for the Burkinabe people. A key part of this strategy has been the expansion of state participation through SOPAMIB, the country's state-owned mining company. Rather than limiting itself to collecting taxes and royalties, the government wants to become a more active participant in production. By acquiring mining assets and increasing ownership in strategic projects, Burkina Faso hopes to retain a larger share of the profits generated by its mineral wealth. At the same time, the government has encouraged stronger participation by domestic companies. For many years, local businesses played only a limited role in industrial mining, while international corporations controlled most large-scale operations. The new approach aims to gradually increase the presence of Burkinabe companies throughout the mining supply chain, from extraction and logistics to technical services and processing. Another important pillar of Traore's strategy is reducing the export of raw gold without adding value inside the country. Historically, much of Burkina Faso's gold left the country for refining abroad before entering international markets. That meant additional profits, skilled jobs, and industrial expertise were created elsewhere. By investing in domestic refining capacity, the government hopes to capture more of those economic benefits at home, while developing new technical industries that can support long-term growth. The administration has also intensified efforts to combat illegal gold mining and cross-border smuggling. Every kilogram of gold that leaves the country through unofficial channels represents lost tax revenue, lost foreign exchange, and lost investment capital. Strengthening oversight, improving traceability, and tightening enforcement are viewed as essential steps in ensuring that more mining revenue reaches the national economy rather than informal networks. Perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of these reforms is the idea of nationalization. Critics often describe Traore's policies as a wholesale rejection of foreign investment. The reality appears more nuanced. Burkina Faso continues to recognize the importance of international capital, advanced mining technology, and global expertise. What is changing is the balance of power within those partnerships. The government wants foreign companies to operate under conditions where the country's long-term interests receive. One of the most innovative parts of Ibrahim Traore's economic strategy is not the expansion of state-owned mines or the revision of mining laws. It is the creation of a financial system designed to make gold work for Burkina Faso long after it has been extracted from the ground. For decades, many resource-rich countries have faced the same dilemma. When commodity prices rise, governments receive more revenue and often increase spending. But when prices fall, public finances come under pressure, forcing cuts to infrastructure projects or increased borrowing. This boom and bust cycle has trapped many economies that depend heavily on natural resources. Burkina Faso is attempting to break that cycle through the establishment of the Sovereign Mining Investment Fund, known as FSMIB, alongside the government's broader initiative called Sinian Sigui, which translates as Preparing for Tomorrow. The philosophy behind the fund is remarkably simple. Instead of spending every additional dollar earned when gold prices rise, the government intends to save and invest a significant portion of those earnings for projects that can strengthen the country's productive capacity over many years. This represents a major shift in financial thinking. Gold is no longer viewed only as an export commodity that generates annual government revenue. It is increasingly being treated as financial capital capable of funding the nation's future. So, to understand why this matters, imagine a family that receives an unexpected financial windfall. One option is to spend all the money immediately on daily expenses. Another option is to place part of it into long-term investments that generate benefits for years to come. Burkina Faso's new fund follows the second approach. It seeks to transform temporary commodity income into permanent national assets. Unlike the regular government budget, which pays for salaries, public administration, and day-to-day operations, the Sovereign Mining Investment Fund is designed to support strategic investments. These may include highways, connecting remote regions, industrial parks that attract manufacturing, energy infrastructure that supports businesses, processing facilities that increase domestic production, and other projects capable of generating future economic growth. This idea is not entirely new. Norway successfully transformed oil revenues into one of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds. Botswana used diamond revenues to finance education, infrastructure, and long-term fiscal stability. Chile created stabilization funds to reduce the impact of volatile copper prices on its economy. Each country developed its own model, but all shared one important principle. Natural resources should benefit future generations, not only the present one. Burkina Faso is adapting that principle to its own circumstances. Rather than copying another country's system, it is designing a model centered on gold, the country's most valuable natural resource. The success of this approach, however, depends on much more than creating a fund on paper. The fund must operate with transparency, professional management, and clear investment rules. Resources must be protected from political pressure, corruption, and short-term spending demands. Every dollar invested should create measurable improvements in productivity, infrastructure, and economic opportunity. If these conditions are met, the country's gold could become far more valuable than the price listed on international commodity market. It could become the financial foundation. If Ibrahim Traore's strategy succeeds, Burkina Faso could achieve something that has challenged many resource-rich nations for decades. Instead of treating gold as a resource to be extracted and exported, the country could transform it into the financial engine that powers long-term national development. That vision lies at the heart of the government's economic reforms. The idea is surprisingly straightforward. Gold is mined, a larger share of its value remains under national control through state participation and stronger local ownership, and part of the resulting revenue is directed into long-term investment funds instead of being spent immediately. Those funds can then finance infrastructure and productive industries that continue generating wealth long after the gold has been sold. This creates a development cycle rather than a single commercial transaction. Mining generates revenue. Revenue finances infrastructure. Better infrastructure attracts businesses. New businesses create jobs, expand production, increase tax income, and strengthen the domestic economy. As industries grow, the country becomes less dependent on exporting raw materials because it begins producing more goods and services with higher added value. Infrastructure plays a central role in this strategy. For many years, inadequate transportation networks have slowed economic growth across Burkina Faso. Farmers often struggle to move crops efficiently. Businesses face higher logistics costs, and many rural communities remain isolated from commercial centers. Improving roads is not simply about transportation. It is about connecting markets, reducing costs, encouraging investment, and improving access to education and healthcare. Energy infrastructure is equally important. Reliable electricity allows factories to operate continuously, supports modern manufacturing, and attracts private investment that might otherwise choose neighboring countries. Industrial parks, processing facilities, and logistics centers can create skilled employment while allowing more of Burkina Faso's natural resources to be processed inside the country rather than exported in raw form. Supporters of the reforms argue that this is why controlling a greater share of mining revenue matters. Gold itself does not create prosperity. The schools, roads, factories, power plants, and businesses financed by that revenue are what ultimately improve people's lives. Recent production figures also strengthen the government's confidence. Burkina Faso produced approximately 94 tons of gold in 2025, one of the highest outputs in its history. Combined with stronger oversight, efforts to reduce illegal mining, and increased state participation, officials believe this production can provide a stronger financial base for future investment. Observers often compare this vision with countries that successfully transformed natural resources into broader economic growth. Norway invested oil revenues through a sovereign wealth fund. Botswana used diamond income to strengthen education, infrastructure, and public finances. While Burkina Faso faces different economic realities, the underlying principle is similar. Temporary resource wealth should become permanent national assets. Of course, success is far from guaranteed. Gold prices fluctuate, security challenges remain, and investment funds require transparent management, professional oversight, and disciplined spending. Without those safeguards, even abundant mineral wealth cannot deliver sustainable development. Ultimately, the true measure of Ibrahim Traore's strategy will not be the number of state-owned mines or the volume of gold produced each year. It will be whether ordinary citizens experience better infrastructure, stronger industries, higher incomes, and greater economic opportunity. If those Every major economic transformation creates resistance, and Burkina Faso's mining reforms are no exception. As Ibrahim Traore expands state participation in the gold sector and redirects more mining revenue toward national development, governments, investors, and international observers have expressed concerns about the long-term consequences of these policies. Understanding those criticisms is important because they highlight both the risks and the opportunities of Burkina Faso's new direction. One of the most common concerns raised by foreign investors is policy uncertainty. Mining projects require enormous financial commitments that often take many years before becoming profitable. Companies invest billions of dollars in exploration, equipment, infrastructure, and skilled personnel with the expectation that the legal framework will remain relatively stable throughout the life of a mine. When governments introduce significant changes to mining laws or increase state ownership, investors naturally question whether future projects will remain commercially attractive. Another concern involves operational efficiency. Large international mining companies possess decades of technical expertise, advanced equipment, and global supply chains that allow them to operate complex mining projects efficiently. Critics argue that expanding state participation could create management challenges if public institutions lack sufficient technical experience, financial resources, or operational flexibility. They warn that reduced efficiency could eventually lower production and discourage future investment. Security also remains an important issue. Burkina Faso continues to face serious threats from armed extremist groups operating in parts of the country. Mining companies must consider not only commercial risks but also the safety of employees, transportation networks, and production facilities. For some investors, security conditions represent an additional layer of uncertainty beyond changes in mining policy. These concerns deserve careful consideration. However, supporters of Traore's reforms present a different perspective. They argue that greater national control over strategic resources does not automatically mean rejecting foreign investment. Instead, they believe it means establishing partnerships in which Burkina Faso receives a fairer share of the wealth generated by its own natural resources. Foreign companies can continue operating, but under agreements that better reflect the country's long-term development goals. Supporters also point to international examples. Norway maintains significant public control over its petroleum resources while remaining an attractive destination for global energy companies. Botswana built one of Africa's strongest economies by ensuring that diamond wealth contributed directly to education, infrastructure, and public services. In both cases, state participation did not eliminate private investment. Instead, it helped align natural resource development with national priorities. And another important argument concerns economic justice. If a country produces billions of dollars worth of gold while large portions of its population continue to face poverty, limited infrastructure, and inadequate public services, many believe it is reasonable to reconsider how mining revenues are distributed. The objective is not simply to increase government ownership, but to increase public benefit. Ultimately, the debate surrounding Burkina Faso's reforms is not a choice between nationalism and globalization. It is a discussion about balance. The country still requires international investment, advanced technology, and Burkina Faso's mining reforms are attracting attention not only because they affect one country's economy, but because they may signal the beginning of a broader shift across Africa. For decades, many African nations accepted a development model in which they exported raw materials while importing finished products, foreign capital, and industrial expertise. Today, several governments are beginning to ask whether that model should continue unchanged. Burkina Faso has become one of the most closely watched examples of this debate. By expanding state participation in mining, strengthening domestic companies, establishing long-term investment funds, and promoting local processing, Ibrahim Traore is attempting to redefine the relationship between natural resources and national development. Whether every policy succeeds or not, the direction itself has captured attention across the continent. Neighboring countries are pursuing similar conversations. Mali has revised its mining legislation to increase the state's share of mining revenues and strengthen national participation. Niger has sought greater control over strategic resources while renegotiating relationships with foreign partners. Zimbabwe has repeatedly encouraged more local processing of its mineral wealth, arguing that exporting raw materials alone cannot deliver sustainable prosperity. Even countries with relatively stable mining sectors continue exploring ways to retain more value from their natural resources before those resources leave their borders. This growing movement reflects a larger change in thinking. The question is no longer whether Africa possesses abundant natural resources. That has never been in doubt. The real question is whether African economies can build industries, infrastructure, and financial independence from those resources instead of remaining dependent on external financing. Within this broader discussion, Ibrahim Traore has emerged as one of the most recognizable voices advocating economic sovereignty. Supporters view him as a leader willing to challenge long-established systems that allowed significant portions of Africa's mineral wealth to benefit foreign economies more than local populations. They argue that true independence requires more than political sovereignty. It also requires meaningful control over the resources that finance national development. Of course, symbolism alone cannot transform an economy. Every country faces different political institutions, security conditions, financial capacities, and administrative challenges. What works in one nation may not be directly transferable to another. Burkina Faso's experience should therefore be viewed as an evolving experiment rather than a finished model. Even so, several lessons are already emerging for other African countries. First, natural resources alone do not create prosperity. Effective institutions and responsible management determine whether resource wealth becomes long-term national development or short-term income. Second, exporting raw materials without expanding domestic value-added industries limits economic potential. Processing, refining, manufacturing, and industrial development allow countries to capture far more value from the same natural resources. Third, sovereign investment funds can provide an important mechanism for transforming temporary commodity revenues into permanent national assets. When managed transparently and professionally, such funds can reduce dependence on external borrowing while supporting infrastructure. As Burkina Faso continues this ambitious journey, one important truth becomes increasingly clear. The country's future will not be determined by the amount of gold beneath its soil alone. It will be determined by how wisely that gold is transformed into lasting opportunities for its people. For generations, many resource-rich nations have struggled with the same paradox. They exported enormous amounts of valuable minerals, yet remained dependent on foreign loans, imported industries, and external financial support. Burkina Faso is attempting to challenge that pattern by asking a different question. Instead of asking how much gold can be sold, the government is asking how much national development that gold can finance. Whether Ibrahim Traore's strategy ultimately succeeds remains an open question. The road ahead is filled with significant challenges. Global gold prices may fluctuate. Security concerns remain a reality. Public investment funds must be managed with transparency, discipline, and accountability. State-owned enterprises must demonstrate efficiency and professionalism. Without strong institutions, even the most ambitious economic vision can fall short of its goals. At the same time, the reforms have already accomplished something important. They have changed the conversation. Across Africa, governments, economists, and ordinary citizens are once again debating who should benefit most from the continent's extraordinary natural wealth. That discussion alone represents a meaningful shift in perspective. The greatest lesson from Burkina Faso may not be about gold itself. It is about the importance of creating systems that transform temporary natural resources into permanent national assets. Roads eventually connect businesses, factories create skilled employment, reliable electricity attracts investment, schools educate future engineers and entrepreneurs. These are the foundations of sustainable prosperity, and they cannot be imported forever. They must eventually be built from within. For other African nations, the message is equally significant. Every country has different resources, institutions, and economic realities, but the principle remains remarkably similar. Development becomes more sustainable when natural wealth finances domestic production instead of simply leaving the country as raw exports. And the responsible partnerships with international investors can continue to play an important role, but those partnerships are strongest when they also strengthen local industries, local businesses, and local communities. History will ultimately judge Captain Ibrahim Traore not by the speeches he delivered or the mining reforms he introduced, but by whether future generations inherit a stronger economy than the one he received. If Burkina Faso succeeds in transforming gold into infrastructure, industry, education, and lasting opportunity, this strategy may become an important reference for the entire Pan-African movement and the broader vision of Pan-Africanism. It could influence discussions within the African Union and inspire other countries seeking greater economic independence in a changing Africa new. If Ibrahim Traore's reforms produce measurable improvements in the lives of ordinary citizens, Burkina Faso may be remembered as one of the countries that helped redefine how Africa thinks about its own resources. What do you think? Can Burkina Faso's new economic strategy become a model for other African nations, or will the challenges prove too difficult to overcome? Share your thoughts. Thank you for being here and watching our video. Every piece of content on this channel is carefully researched, written, edited, and reviewed by our team to ensure it reflects our own work and editorial approach. We do not rely on automated mass production. Each video presents our perspective on current events related to President Ibrahim Traore and developments across Africa.